Hey everybody, welcome to the Healing Place Daily Devotional Podcast. We are looking at the names of God, and we have a good one today. We have Yahweh Sabaoth. Yahweh Sabaoth, and it means this, the Lord of heaven's armies. This is one of the coolest passages in the Old Testament. You'll see as we dive in just why. It's one of my favorite. In Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 15, it says, when Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and he demanded, are you friend or are you foe? Verse 14 says, neither one, he replied. I am the commander of the Lord's army. At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. I am at your command, Joshua said. What do you want your servant to do? And in verse 15, it says, the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did as he was told. This is crazy. Joshua has just taken over the reins from Moses, and they are embarking on a conquest of the promised land. God had promised their ancestor, Abraham, many, many years ago, that they would one day occupy the land of Israel. And here Joshua has this unique task. He's been given this call to take the people of Israel and actually go into the promised land. And he's outside of his first battle. It's the Battle of Jericho. And the city of Jericho was a heavily fortified city. This was a big deal. And so Joshua is, I'm sure, feeling very overwhelmed. And right before he's going to go, he sees this man standing there, and he looks like a warrior, like a captain or a commander. And so he asks what anybody else would. Who are you? Are you my enemy or are you my friend? Are you for me or are you against me? And what's interesting is the answer that this figure gives. He says, neither one. I am the commander of the Lord's army. Now, what's interesting is who is this person that Joshua is speaking to? This is actually what we call a theophany. It's one of these unique experiences where we see Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. We know that this is the same figure as the angel of the Lord. How do we know that? Because look what he says. He says, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. That's exactly what the angel of the Lord said to Moses at the burning bush experience. So we know this is the same figure. And then when we go to the book of Revelation and we see God's armies, who is the person that is the commander of God's armies in the book of Revelation? Well, it's Jesus. And so we see that this is Jesus appearing to Joshua in the Old Testament. And I love Joshua's question. He says, are you my friend or my foe? And understanding all of that context, we would expect what? We would expect Jesus, right? The commander of the Lord's armies. We would expect him to say, oh, I'm for you, man. I'm totally for you. That's not what he says. He's like, I'm not on your side. I'm on the Lord's side. Because the real question is, are you on the Lord's side? And this is a question that every single one of us need to be asking. Am I fighting my battles and asking God to come alongside me, or am I fighting God's battles? And that's a huge distinction, because sometimes we want to just go and pick our own battles and pick our own wars, and we just expect God to come alongside us. God is not our ally. We are God's ally. We are part of his army. He's not part of ours. And so what does he say? He says, I want you to do some things. And I love how Joshua just submits himself. Joshua submits himself and he says, I am your servant. Here, Joshua is in charge of millions of Israelites. But when he sees Jesus, when he sees the commander of the Lord's army, he knows very quickly who's really in charge. He says, I'm just your servant. And look, this is an important thing for all of us. This is an important posture that we all need to live in. We need to live in a posture that says, you know what? I'm not in charge and God's here to help me. God is in charge and I'm his servant. What will you have me do? And what's cool is Jesus gives Joshua this awesome battle plan, and we know the rest of the story. They go in and they win all the conquests. But I just had this one simple thought for you today. Supernatural things happen when we fight God's battles and follow God's ways. Supernatural things happen when we fight God's battles and follow God's ways. Let's not fight our own fights today. Let's not ask God to come alongside us. Let's link with God's agenda, God's mission, God's battles, and say, God, we want to fight those with you. Hey, look, that's all we have for today. Be back tomorrow as we continue our study on the names of God.